Since I started riding 2 years ago, I've really struggled to find a good group of riders that I really enjoy riding with. Most of my group rides are done with my local IAM group, but on most rides I'm the youngest one there by probably at least 20 years. And it got me thinking about why I've struggled to meet other riders my age and other riders that I actually feel safe riding with. And I think it's just that there's not a lot of young people on bikes, so I wanted to explore a little bit more about why this could be and maybe what we can do to change that. And when I say young riders, I'm mostly referring to people in their early 20s, but since there's so few of them, I'll open it up and I'll include all people in their 20s, and why there are not a lot of them. And I started thinking about what got me interested in bikes when I was around 21. You don't get a lot of 21-year-olds who suddenly become interested in motorcycles, and you get even fewer 21-year-old women. And the thing that got me interested in bikes, and I think this is true for every single person who now rides a motorbike, is that I knew someone who rode bikes. I had some friends and some family members. I thought it was really cool and I wanted to try it. And pretty much everyone I speak to and everyone I ask, how did you get into bikes, what got you into bikes, they either had a friend, a family member, a partner or a parent, or just somebody who is interested in bikes and who is in their life. And I think just in general you have less people riding bikes today than you did in the past. Maybe the absolute number is higher, but when you compare it to how much the population has grown, I think just as a proportion, motorcyclists are kind of shrinking. And it just means that you're less likely to come across a motorcyclist in your daily life. And I think it's the biggest reason why more women don't ride as well. People tend to hang out with people who are similar to them. And if there's not a lot of female riders, you're not likely to have a female friend who rides, and you're not likely to get inspired by that and want to try it yourself. So it becomes a little bit of a cycle, which is a bit of a shame. I think it really helps when you're first getting into bikes to have someone that you know in real life and who can actually mentor you and teach you how to ride. When I first passed my CBT, I didn't actually take my bike home for about 3 weeks. I had it stored at a friend's house. I spent 3 weeks going up there, riding up and down the road, practicing my U-turns, practicing moving off and stopping and everything, until I felt confident enough to take it on the main road, and he was coaching me through that process. If you don't have that, riding a motorbike is pretty scary, and it's not fun to be terrified every time you go out on the road. It takes time to build up your confidence and build up your experience, and if you don't have someone there helping you and walking you through that process, a lot of people just won't get into bikes, or they'll give it up very quickly after passing their CBT or getting their license. It's not an easy hobby, it's got a very high barrier to entry, and if you don't have a community and people supporting you through that, it's very easy to just want to give it up. I think whenever you're looking at things like this and you're trying to understand why certain demographics do something and certain demographics don't, you can't look at any issue in isolation. You have to look at society as a whole. And I think society as a whole right now is pretty difficult for young people. Starting salaries are very low compared to the cost of living, and everyone's feeling this, but especially young people, if you look at things like trying to buy a house or trying to move out of your parents' house, that's really difficult to do, and for most people that's probably their number one priority, or at least it's really high up there. When times are tough financially, or you have big goals that you're trying to reach, the first things that you cut out are going to be luxuries and hobbies and fun and entertainment. And motorcycling, for a lot of people, it's not a cheap way to get around. For most people, it's just fun. It's a vehicle, it's expensive, it takes maintenance and training and gear. It's not a cheap hobby. I think a lot of young people right now are going to look at the cost of getting your motorcycle license. It cost me £1,000 to get my motorcycle license. They're going to look at the cost of gear and bikes and insurance especially, and especially if you live in a city, and they're going to decide, you know what, this isn't worth it. I'm trying to save to do other things. I'm trying to save to buy a house or move out of my parents' house, and this really expensive hobby just isn't one of my priorities. I think the fact that people are living with parents for later and later is definitely a factor of why there's less young motorcyclists on the road. Most people's parents are probably going to be anti-motorcycle, and most people in society just think motorcycling is really dangerous. It's not like when you get your car license and your parents help you pay for insurance or driving lessons. Most parents aren't going to support their kid if they decide, I want to go buy a motorbike, unless their bike is themselves. So I think most people living at home are going to look at the situation and say, I'm going to try and save as much as I can, I'm going to move out, and maybe then I'll get a motorbike. And maybe then you might be in your late 20s, early 30s, or maybe even later than that. I think everybody's feeling the squeeze, and it's not just young people right now who are looking at their bikes in the garage and saying, man, I could really do with that few £1,000, I could really do with cancelling that insurance payment. In my lifetime, I don't really remember a time when there's been prosperity and everything's been good and everybody's been paid well and the cost of living is low. And unfortunately, in that kind of situation, motorcycling is just one of those hobbies that disappear. And of course that leads to the cycle that I was describing earlier, where there's less riders on the road, you're less likely to meet one, you're less likely to meet someone that can mentor you and guide you, and it leads to even less people getting interested in bikes. I think motorcycling will always be seen as one of those kind of rebellious hobbies, and it's never going to be 100% accepted in society, but I think still the biggest opinion about motorcycling is that it's really dangerous and it's only a matter of time before you're killed if you go out on a bike. And that's really off-putting to anybody trying to get into the hobby. Since I've started riding, I realised that it's not inevitable that you're just going to crash every time you go out. You can be careful, you can do things, but obviously if it goes wrong, it goes really wrong, and you don't want that. Pretty much everyone I know on bikes has had an accident or some kind of mishap, but really that's true for pretty much every driver I know too. It's just that a mishap in a car is a non-issue, it's a dented bumper or a scratch. A mishap on a motorbike could be a broken bone. So it's just seen as a lot more dangerous. I think that puts a lot of people off. I think a lot of people just don't want to take on that risk. And I think that's always been true, and it's still true. It's always bad news that gets the most traction, and when you go on YouTube and you want to watch motorcycling videos, you're going to be watching crash videos over and over and over again, people smashing mirrors, road rage. You're not going to be watching a video of someone riding around safely. That's really boring. And it leads to people thinking that, man, if I get involved in motorcycling, I'm going to be having crash after crash after crash. That's everything I see on social media. And it's not true if you don't want it to be. And I also think that bike theft is a factor, and this relates to young people's living situation at the minute. So for example, living with parents or living in a flat share. If you don't have anywhere safe to store a bike, you're probably going to avoid getting one. It's not worth having it stolen every few months. And even the horror stories about bike theft might be overblown, but it does put people off getting into the hobby, and young people generally, they don't have a nice house with a garage where they can store something safely. I also think the licensing system is very complicated, and again, if you don't know a motorcyclist, it's really hard to understand and to navigate. I thought I had to be 24 to get a motorbike because I was looking at the different licenses. It was telling me I could ride a 125 or I could ride 40 horsepower or whatever, and I didn't understand what any of this meant, and I thought, you know what, might as well just wait till I'm 24, do my full license, and then not have to worry about it. But if you have someone to guide you and to kind of explain the bikes that you can and can't ride and what that power feels like, you realise that even on a restricted license, you can still have a lot of fun. But the licensing system is very complicated. For somebody who's never ridden a bike, they're looking at a restriction that says, I can only ride 40 horsepower, 45 horsepower, I don't really understand what that is, I'm just gonna wait. Having to pay to take your full license after you've already done your restricted license is a huge barrier to any young person looking to get into motorbikes. Why should I pay twice? And it's not any cheaper to get my full license. I'm going to have to pay all that money again in a few years' time when I want to get my unrestricted license. That is a huge barrier. People either stay on a CBT until they're 24 and then do their full license, or they're just going to put off riding until they're old enough to go straight for the A license. It used to be that if you had an A2 license, after 2 years it would automatically upgrade to a full license, and I'm not sure that I really agree with that because it's not uncommon that somebody gets their license but they don't actually ride, or they only ride 1,000 or 2,000 miles a year. So I think there should be some kind of retesting when you're allowed to go for a bigger bike. But I think it should be just that. I think it should just be a retest, like an extended CBT or something. I think there should be a way of just upgrading your license after a quick retest, and you shouldn't have to pay the same money to go through all that training and test again. So I think the licensing system is a pretty big barrier to young people, and unfortunately I think that's how it's supposed to be, so I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. And finally, the fact that motorcycling is an aging community is not helping young people get into bikes. It's really hard to convince someone to get into bikes when they think, why should I on a Sunday morning go to a cafe and sit with a bunch of people in their 50s and 60s? That doesn't sound very fun. And without community, motorcycling can be as fun as you want it to be. But people don't do things just for fun. People do things to hang out with people and to socialise. And if there's nobody there that looks like you and that you can relate to and that you want to socialise with, it's very hard to sell motorcycling as a social hobby. I think it's going to be very hard to get more young people into motorcycling until we have more prosperity in society and things financially are easier for young people and they can afford fun, interesting hobbies like motorcycling. I think if you have the opportunity to mentor somebody just getting into bikes and help them on that journey in their first or second year, that's really helpful, and that's really going to keep the community alive, and that's really going to make a difference on the road. Until then, I'll be keeping my eye out, and I hope that a new generation of motorcyclists really does come through, because at the minute, it's a little bit lacking. Safe riding, and I'll see you guys in the next one.